So Aspen Matis, I have your big, long, beautiful bio, but I don't want to take up too much time reading it. I'm going to send it to everybody so you all know who this beautiful soul is. Um, Aspen, let me see, unless you want me to read it, Aspen.
No, you don't have to.
Okay. So here's what I know about Aspen. Besides her being an incredibly beautiful, powerful, passionate soul, she's my personal mentor. Um, One of the things that I just wrote about today in our class about what inspired me to write my book, Aspen walked through the door, and I got to find out about her book. I read her book, and I was so inspired by her honesty, her candidness, her depth, her poetry, but also her groundedness. And I felt like she was so friggin' brave. And by contrast, I felt like a scaredy cat wimp hiding behind all my spiritual kind of pomp and circumstance. And I was like, I don't want to be spiritual and removed from everybody. I want to break down my walls and get more raw and real. And you've encouraged me to do that. And I feel so much more connected to people as a result of working on this book, Aspen. Whether it ever gets published or not, the practice of doing it and being brave enough to tell the stories and share it with some people has changed me. And so your first book, Girl in the Woods, is your true story about you being raped on your second day of college and then finding your strength through walking the the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada. And talk about out of the frying pan and into the oven or whatever that saying is, like, whoa. And then you write your second book, Your Blue Is Not My Blue, about the relationship, your marriage that came as a result of you walking the Pacific Crest Trail, and then he disappears and goes missing. And so two memoirs, all before you're 30 years old. So we can be so inspired, and we should be so inspired. New York Times bestselling, Amazon.com bestselling books. I really just am so, I love you beyond words, and I just
Love you too.
showing up and being our first mentor for this workshop. And I want to invite you to share a little bit of whatever's on your heart about some of what has you keep showing up. What are some of your best practices for getting her done consistently?
Yeah, well, I always say, and it's nothing like too extraordinarily original, but for me, like, and I think for many artists, like, writing spawns writing, and ideas trigger ideas, and one day off really is like 2 days lost. So the momentum of showing up every day, whether or not you feel like it. Like my mentor, or one of my mentors, Susan Shapiro, always says, like, um, plumbers don't get plumber's block. A page a day is a buck a year. Get to work. Like, it's kind of like, it's true that if you kind of wait to feel like it, you'll probably never actualize the project that's in you. It's almost like, very, as Kelly sometimes says, very blue collar, showing up every day, sitting down and really grinding it out, whether or not it feels right. And like, there's also a quote that I love by Annie Dillard, the Pulitzer Prize winning um, memoirist, and she wrote A Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, which is a beautiful book. She always says, like, or she wrote a book about writing called, oh God, oh, I'm blanking on the name now, but if you just Google Annie Dillard writing book, it'll come up. And in it, she talks about how the writer's perception of the quality of their work is unreliable, and it should be swatted away like a mosquito buzzing in your ear. Like, if whether you think your work is brilliant or whether you think it's terrible is totally irrelevant, because you're probably wrong. And so if you struggle with confidence, and a lack of confidence in your work, know that you are not reliable in that. And somebody else might read it and start to cry and be like, me too, and I needed this. And you can't possibly know that, because everyone's life is normal to themselves, so you can't see the magic in how extraordinary your story is. just like an eye cannot see itself kind of, because you're in it. So
It's The Writing Life, by the way. I just put the link to the book.
The Writing Life, yeah. It's a great book.
Yeah. So one of the things that I am hearing from some of the people in this group, and I imagine everybody struggles with it all the time, is the critic. So you were just talking about that, like the Annie
Yeah.
thing, like we're not objective about our work. We are not. Suzanne in our group said the other day, and I love this quote about how we have an inaccurate perception of ourselves. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
But how do you work with your critic? And do you have one, first of all? I mean,
Of
you're being
course.
so
Yeah.
vulnerable. Everybody go out and get Aspen's books. It'll blow your mind. It's amazing, her turn of phrase, and it just makes you see the world differently. So I couldn't
Thank you.
imagine having an inner critic, but what do you do with it?
Just try to work despite it. Like, I feel like it's never, really never productive to like indulge it, even though it's very tempting. Just like we like to torture ourselves in lots of ways, like by thinking about worst case scenarios, or replaying something in our head that someone said that we don't like there are infinite ways to torture yourself psychologically. But I think choosing to remember why you're writing, sometimes even like before I write something that feels very vulnerable or emotional, almost just like kind of doing a Kelly style meditation in my mind. I don't know if you've done any meditations in this class, but
Yeah,
like
we start every time with one.
awesome. Yeah. So kind of doing something like that in my mind, where I just kind of return in my mind to the spark, to like, why is it important to tell this story? Why is this story important? What might it do for me? What might it do for the people who read it, who needed to hear it? And just representing the why, and also representing that Amy Dillard quote that like, whether or not I think this is worth doing, or whether or not I think this scene is actualized or as good as it could be, or even interesting, it's not my decision. It's just my job is to write the story that's burning in me. And the first draft, I think what's really liberating is it's a first draft. It's no one will ever see the parts that you don't want them to see. It's almost like your only job in the first draft is just to say what happened, especially in memoir. Just kind of even like just say, like, tell it like you would tell it to a friend. Just say what happened as if you were writing an email to a friend almost, and you just try to get it out with as much honesty and specificity as possible. Because like it's a famous quote, but it's absolutely true. God is in the detail. It's in the detail. It's in the idiosyncratic, weird, specific fact of the reality that the story pops and comes to life. It's not in the grandiose, like, platitudes. Like, those are mostly boring, and mostly those will get cut. But don't worry about that in the first draft. Like, really just say what happened, as if you were telling a friend.
So as you say this, there's so Suzanne just read a piece, and she talked about this the alcohol or the antiseptic smell, and I can still smell it here. And I feel like that little detail is like,
Yeah, smells like, yeah, it's like the cliche writing advice, show don't tell. It really is true.
right.
Yeah,
So
like
finding,
yeah, sensory, like smell, taste, sound,
right.
like yeah, visual things, specific weird things that you remember. And the things that people say and do that are weird and specific, and their mannerisms, and whatever.
I have to just say this because it's funny. I hadn't thought about this before. What you were talking about earlier about you just keep working around, like around your critic. And I want to go back and forth for a second. I'm remembering when I was young and during the, I don't know, the 70s when I was growing up, there was like a whole thing where there was obscene phone callers. Jenny Murphy, do you remember that? It's like people just would call and just and and my mom would just say, just hang up on him. Just hang up on him. Like they'll call somebody else. Like just don't. And I remember being around some friends that would be like, how come you're calling me? Leave me alone. Why are you doing this to me? And they would, then that would just encourage them. And I feel like in some way that's kind of like with the critic about you're not a good enough writer. You shouldn't write. It's like just hang up and keep writing. Anyway, had to
Yeah.
treat your
No, or
critic like
just like
a phone caller.
maybe it's really like a mosquito buzzing. It's annoying, but it really like you're not like it's meaningless. The mosquito isn't telling you anything worth hearing. It's just making noise.
And there's a lot more stuff we can do with embracing it. And Joey's writing a book about embracing and loving, falling in love with your shadows. So that's a whole other thing. And
Mm.
Susan, the one who read today last week, said something about, well, write about it then. It's like instead of having it shut you down, then funnel it, funnel it into your writing. Do some,
Right about the critic.
yeah, or like let it be part of the character. What do you think about that? About like putting that insecurity or some of that. I mean, in your book, in Girl in the Woods, I feel like I get to hear your critical self about yourself, and it makes me feel so close to you, and it makes me feel like, oh my God, me too. So you don't keep us away from insecurity and
Yeah, I mean, I would say writing about your writing critic might be a little inside baseball and a little meta and not that interesting to other people. But if I think maybe more for therapy or working through the process, it might be useful. Unless that's what your book is about, you know.
or it
If your
could be
book is
about
about overcoming your inner critic, then
right.
that could be that's a valuable book to write. But it might be elliptical to the central threads of your memoir if that's not what your book is about. So, but yeah, certainly revealing your vulnerability and your insecurity as is relevant to your narrative is always, important.
Well, in some way, it seems like what you've done and what inspired me so much is it's almost like you did exactly what's opposite of what we're supposed to do in normal polite society, which is kind of like, hi, I'm fine, and here's all the things about me that are so fabulous. But in your
Mhm.
writing, it's like it felt like you just went into you went into the pain, and it's like there's this very raw revealing. And is there I feel inspired. I don't know if this is what you would say, but it makes me feel like I've become a magpie of even looking for my wounds and looking for my pain and saying, come to mama, let's write about you. It's like there's something
Yeah.
alive in that instead of being, so can you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, so Sue Shapiro, who I quote a ton, she
Mm.
always says like writing is a way to take the worst thing in your life and to turn it into the most beautiful. And I think that that's a great way of looking at it, like an alchemical act. It's an alchemy. You take the secret shame or the skeleton that's always been in your closet that you wouldn't want anyone to know, and you essentially tell on yourself and you put that shadow into the light. And in the light diffuses that shadow and it disappears and it's no longer a shadow. And it's a vulnerable, like beating heart that other people that causes other people to remember their own vulnerable beating heart and to touch their heart and to feel what you're feeling, because as human beings we all essentially struggle with the same things, like feeling unworthy, feeling unlovable, feeling like a fraud, feeling like I'm a bad person, whatever thing resonates with you, and we all kind of feel like, oh, it's just us. But then when we write about it honestly, we discover that that's the most normal thing to feel as a human being, and other people will relate. And you're not the only one who feels that way.
Do you mind if I ask you about this is a very gnarly piece of your story, Girl in the Woods, that you shared with me. You ended up putting it in your book, that you, and you said at the last minute you weren't going to put it in your book, but at the last minute you did, and it became such a deep place of resonance with people. um I don't know, I mean, it's kind of heavy to get into, but I guess the point, should I, okay, let's just say it then. um I feel like it's such a deep thing what you've written about. I don't want to talk about it in like a quick way, but I do want to acknowledge that you went so deep into things that most people wouldn't have admitted. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think I do know what you're talking about.
Would you be willing to say anything around that or about that?
Sure. Though I will say that like that's a book I wrote a really long time ago, and it's not like very present and fresh to me now. But yeah, what Kelly is talking about is um I included a detail when I talked about the rape that occurred on my second day of my freshman year of college when I was 18, about how afterwards I asked the boy if he would sleep over. Like I actually begged him to please sleep over, because I like desperately wanted to feel like I had wanted this and that it wasn't rape. And like as if I could like retroactively correct it by him sleeping over. And when I included that detail, I thought that I would hear from rich people who said, like, then that's not what rape is. So, you know, if you asked me to sleep over, then you wanted this. And I was really nervous about that. But instead, I heard from so many people, um, who wrote to me and said essentially like, I also asked my rapist to sleep over, or I tutored my rapist in chemistry, or I wrote my rapist love songs after, and I tried to forge a friendship. And I really discovered through this that everyone thought that they must be the only one, and it must be evidence that they were crazy and that there was something wrong with them, and or that it wasn't rape. When in fact, um, it's they were all actually just essentially trying to retroactively correct his crime, you know, and to try to like almost erase it and turn back time, which is the most psychologically normal reaction, and doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or that you're crazy or that you're stupid or that it wasn't rape. It's a very, very normal and common reaction to being violated. And I discovered that only through being honest about my reaction, you know, that I was so ashamed about. And then only through being honest about it did I discover that um, it's a healthy psychological response to that kind of trauma, and that it's not, I wasn't the only one, and it didn't mean all the things I thought it meant about me.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that and your amazing courage, because I think there's something about that detail, because I realized that I had done that, and I'd never heard anybody talk about that, and I was like, that it blew my mind. And it also, so as like psychologically speaking, as just a reader, I was, there was a healing in in receiving your book.
Thank you.
There's, but
And I'm
as a,
so sorry that that happened too.
yeah, me too. And but there's something about like the Me Too, like, oh my God, that,
Yeah.
so you did that for me. But then as a writer, you also set the bar so high, like, oh my God, the courage that that takes to be able to do that, to first of all just write about it, and then putting the book out in the world, and then dealing with the world. Like, talk about layers and layers and layers of courage. But I want to say, because we're about the time to open up for Q&A. um, I want to just acknowledge, as a result of you writing this book, and this is for all of you, and Jenny Murphy, you and I got to share a little bit during our breakout session. You were saying something about when you write a book, it's something that no one can take away from you, and it's like something that you've created and you've put into the world. As a result of Aspen writing this book, she was asked to become the national spokesperson for RAIN. That's the tell us a little bit about this honor that you got to do for a while.
Yeah, so RAIN is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, which is like the largest like rape response and anti-sexual violence nonprofit in the United States. And I had called the free anonymous 24-hour hotline that RAINN provides after my own rape. And so when I hiked from Mexico to Canada, I did that to raise money for RAINN. And then after I wrote about that experience for the New York Times, and then I wrote a book about it, they asked me if I would be on their speakers bureau. And I wasn't the only one, but one of the faces of the organization. Yeah, and it was very, it felt very gratifying to get to do events where I knew I was, providing a message that people needed to hear. Yeah.
So there's something about getting the book out there. Can you guys hear me a little bit better now? Okay, thank you. But like what a career altering trajectory you've been on. I mean, writing your book, putting
I
this
had
book.
no career before that. I mean, I was a college freshman. It wasn't really
Then
career.
suddenly.
Yeah.
So I think it might be kind of fun for you all to hear this little story, if you don't mind, Aspen, about if you could kind of in quick succession, you writing your modern love essay and kind of the what happened with writing this essay.
Yeah. So basically I took a class at the New School called, taught by Susan Shapiro, called the Instant Gratification Takes Too Long School of Journalism. And the goal of the class was to write and publish a piece by the end of the class to pay for the class. So you can't get an A unless you get paid. So it's a very vocational approach to writing. And it was so exciting. And she brought New York Times editors and New Yorker editors and Wall Street Journal editors to the class, and we got to pitch them. And now she teaches these classes on Zoom, and I completely recommend them.
She's going to be one of our speakers. She's coming in towards the end, in February. So you'll all get to meet her.
That's awesome. Yeah, you should take her class. It changed my life. But yeah, so in that class, I got published in the New York Times Modern Love column, writing the story of my hike from the rape, the hike from Mexico to Canada, and on that hike, meeting the man who I ended up marrying. The piece was called A Hiker's Guide to Healing. And that piece kind of went viral, and that column is very widely read already. It runs as a full page in Sunday Styles in the New York Times. And so I heard from editors and agents, and all the editors were like, do you have a book? Do you have a book? And I didn't have a book, but I forwarded the emails to Sue, and I was like, what do I do? They're asking me if I have a book. I feel like this is my opportunity, but I don't have a book. What do you think I should say? And she said, here's what you do. You tell them all, yes, I have a book. I am not yet ready to show you pages. And so I responded to all of them, yes, I'm working on a memoir. I'm not yet ready to show you pages. And they all responded immediately, standing by. And I was like, oh shoot, now I actually have to write a book. And so, yeah, so over that summer, I wrote the first 50 pages of the book, and then I sent them to the agents who I was interested in, who had reached out, because I wanted an agent so I would get a better deal. And the agent who I really wanted met with me, but said, hey, I can't represent you based on 50 pages of the book. You either have to write the whole book or write a book proposal. And I didn't even know what a book proposal was. And when I learned, I was like, I don't want to do that. It's an 100-page document, might as well, instead of
write the book,
write the book. But then Sue was like, no, it's much easier to create a book proposal than to write an entire manuscript. And that will take you so long that everyone will have forgotten who you are by then. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I took a proposal writing class taught by a professor who Sue recommended. And in that class, I wrote my book proposal and I sent it to the agent who I was interested in. He signed me, and within 2 weeks, he had sold my book to HarperCollins. Yeah. So the whole process took a year, but it was very exciting.
So I think there's something super exciting about just being in the presence of this and knowing that this happens. And this is like, there's fairy dust around this, and we all have our own trajectory. We all have our own path, and we never know exactly how that will unfold. But I think the principle remains. Like, you did the blue collar work. You did the work, you suited up, you showed up, and you wrote your buns off. And you really, really did. You wrote a lot of pages. I mean, and then your whole next book, by the way, Your Blue Is Not My Blue, is kind of about the writing of that book. Meanwhile, the man she's writing about is gone. So there's this like tension and drama.
Writing about falling in love with him in his absence, missing him, worried about him, not knowing where he is, and writing about falling in love with him on deadline for my first book, a memoir. So I can't change the ending because it has to be true.
Right.
So
So I want to open up the space for, let me see, how do I unpin? I want to get your questions. So gallery, here we go. So if you all have any questions for Aspen, now is the time. Any thoughts, any questions, anything. So let her rip. So Susan's in Bali, by the way, Aspen.
wow, cool.
I know.
Hi,
Take it away.
Aspen. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
And
Can you speak
hi.
up a little, Susan?
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks for being with us and sharing. And I wanted to ask you, out of all your experience with writing and getting published and all that, what was the most challenging? What was the part that you didn't like?
The most challenging part of the writing process, or the publishing industry?
Yeah, the industry. I think I'm asking about the industry, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I probably shouldn't say this, but
Say it.
well, this is being recorded to share, right?
I can stop I can pause it.
I'll just say that I didn't see eye to eye with my editor at HarperCollins, so that created a lot of tension. We had different visions for the book, and that was probably the hardest part.
That was politically correct. Well said, Aspen.
And he was a great editor, and yeah, I do think that
The book turned out great.
But did you emerge with your own like because I've heard other writers say that an editor wanted to change something that in their heart it was really essential, and then did you emerge with your own voice, or did you feel like it got shifted?
Yes,
And how
I
important
was,
is that?
yeah, I was a huge advocate for my voice, and I think ultimately he made the book better. It's kind of like he wanted to pull it in this direction, I wanted it in that direction, and it ended up exactly as I wanted it, and influenced by his intelligence in terms of trimming and like streamlining and being like, this book can't be about all these things, it can only be about a few things. It was just a very tumultuous and challenging process, but I think a great editor makes a book more of what it already is and highlights a voice and magnifies a voice rather than trying to alter a voice. Yeah, and I think ultimately that happened. It just wasn't like a linear process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah,
Who else has a question? Don't be shy, anybody. This is your chance to have a up close and personal conversation with Aspen. Until I see another hand go up, and you can put the little hand so I can see it. The little, oh, Judy Brooks. Oh, let me unmute you. Judy is working on a memoir. Oh, where'd she go? There she is. Unmute Judy. There you are.
Go. Hi, Aspen. I love your story, and I love that. But I want to know how, when you sat down and wrote the book proposal, do you feel like you actually got a lot of the book in that first proposal?
No, not at all. In fact, I think that's one of my like mistakes that I made. I only included the first 15. So I wrote 50 pages originally and showed them to the agent, and then he told me to write, a book proposal. And those 50 pages, like 50, were not great. I wrote them so fast, and they weren't, I knew that they weren't good enough. And like even people, people who knew better than I did read them and said, yeah, like pick the best 15. And I did. And I kind of rushed it. What I should have done is picked those best 15 and then written another 50 and picked the best 15 of those and had more sample pages. But instead I was like, very much like time is of the essence, like I just, I don't want all these editors and agents who've reached out to forget about me. And so I only had 15 sample pages, which is not a typical amount and not really the recommended amount in my book proposal. So no, I hadn't written very much of the book.
But okay, great. Well, I think that they just loved your story. They wanted your story. They knew they would get it out of you. You would write it and they would get it out of you.
To be honest, like I think they would have bought it just off of the Modern Love, just that article.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I just didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah. And are you working on anything right now?
I am, yeah. I'm working on 2 projects actually. One is a novel set in like a near future society, but I won't go too much into it because
It's amazing. It's
very good.
amazing.
It's so good.
It's so good. Karina and I know.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, there is an epic poem that is actually co-written. It's sort of halfway between a play and a poem. So.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I actually have my first ever published poem coming out tomorrow.
What?
See?
Yeah. It's going to be on Best American Poetry. I'll share it on social media.
Oh, so
great.
speaking of, tell everybody your social media handles and all of that so everybody can find you.
I think it's just my name, Aspen Matis, like ASPEN Matis, MATIS. So if you just Google Aspen Matis Facebook or Aspen Matis Instagram, it'll come up. I think it's at Aspen Matis.
So this will be your first published poem.
Yeah, I will.
That's exciting. Congratulations.
Thank
And by
you.
the way, Aspen's Modern Love. So how many of you, show of hands, are familiar with New York Times Modern Love, the Modern Love column? Karina knows about it. Yeah. So it's actually even a television show now. They've made it. It's such a successful column. So if any of you have a love story, if there's like any kind of a romantic aspect of your story, we could talk about how you could, do something similar to what Aspen did, write a very short and sweet article that might be right for New York Times. I mean, it's for Modern Love. It's not an easy thing to get into. They get a ton of submissions, but it's what a powerful way to get through. What were you going to say, Ask? What I wanted to say is NPR did not NPR, they did the audio version of it. So there's the podcast.
Yeah.
NPR. So Aspen's article is also, so you can, if you get the podcast, the Modern Love podcast, look up A Hiker's Guide to Healing, and you can hear I can't remember who the actress was that was you.
Carmen Esposito.
Yeah. She was good.
Yeah, she was great.
She was really good.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Julie, this is my mom, Aspen. Have you met my mom before?
No. Wait,
This is my mom.
Where's Kelly's mom?
And she's a poet as well. She's writing a book of poetry, a kind of a memoir book of poetry. Where'd you go?
Incredible.
Oh, she just popped off.
There she is.
Wait,
She's there.
No, I think I see her. Is that her on the screen?
There she is. She just moved. Okay.
My hair combed. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for making Kelly.
Living poetry.
Yes. And then a poem.
What's your question?
I was wondering, when you were on the trail from Mexico to the Pacific Coast, on the Pacific
Put to Canada.
to Canada. Okay. Were you riding a lot on the trail?
The short answer is no. I mean, I wrote poems and I wrote little tiny things for myself, but no, I wasn't writing a lot.
Okay. So you were was it a hard survival, or I'm going to read the book right away.
Oh, you gotta read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, in some ways it was hard. It wasn't, I was walking like on average, like a marathon a day through the mountains with a backpack on. So physically it was really hard.
A marathon a day for 6 months. A marathon a day for 6 months with a backpack on.
I was 19, so it was better, it was a good time to do that. I don't know if I could do it right now.
Were you by yourself?
Yeah, I was. I started by myself, but then a lot of people are, through Hike the Trail each year, about 400 people did it my year. So I made friends with the other through hikers and hiked in little different groups.
Oh, interesting.
It was like camp.
Uh-huh.
It was fun.
Wow.
She met the guy she married there, so she wasn't alone the whole time. But there were some very scary moments. The book starts with a very scary moment where she almost freezes to death. And I mean, there's the part where you're like walking over rattlesnakes as if they were just twigs on the path because there were so many of them, and you're just like, la da 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 da. Oh my God. And running out of water. Like,
you remember everything, Kelly.
I do. It impacted me. You guys, Girl in the Woods, it's so good.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Do you have any, how about for those who are writing?
Just so you know, Karina, who's in this class, edited, was the angel editor. Not
let's just shout out to Karina. You guys, we have an amazing.
She was like the real, my editor was also a real editor, but like she had a huge hand in Girl in the Woods.
And by the way,
yeah.
In Aspen's second book, Your Blue Is Not My Blue, Karina is one of the main characters in Aspen's book. So I got to read it about our Karina, who's on the screen. It says Kara, grandma, but it's Karina.
And here to confuse you all.
I know, she's like so sneaky, but I got to hear all about Karina before I met her. So when I met her, I was like, starstruck, because it's like, you're a Karina ballerina. Oh my God. And Karina lives up. She is even more fabulous than Aspen wrote about her. And Aspen writes about her. So she really brings the spirit of Karina to life, and how essential Karina was to helping Aspen get her book written. And so we're so lucky to have Karina in this for the long haul, and to have Aspen's fairy dust magic in here with us.
Yeah. Girl in the Woods would have been a completely different book, and it might not have actually ever gotten finished without Karina.
It was getting finished, but it was so fun to work on. We had a really, really great time. I feel like there's something really, really special and intimate about editing each other's books, and it was so much fun.
What was something for you, Karina? So go ahead, Aspen.
Oh no, I was just agreeing.
So Karina, is there anything you want to say, like going back in time to being in New York in the ballerina nest? Aspen's apartment in New York was this teeny cute little apartment called the Ballerina Nest, with turquoise walls and a fire escape, and in the coolest neighborhood. And Karina and Aspen are like doing so much there. If you go back in time, is there anything that you think is part of what you learned about writing that you could share with us from having worked with Aspen?
Yes, actually, Kelly, we were talking about this the other week. And you were saying that it would be something that would be fun to talk about in class, but I actually was talking about how working with you, Aspen, and Sue was such, it was a really fundamental, you've totally heard this too, but so when I met Aspen, I was, like maybe 2 years fresh off my trip that I'm writing about now around the world. And I'd been writing for myself and like loving it. But Aspen really also totally took me under her wing and introduced me to Sue Shapiro, who also became my mentor, and brought me into this world of writers. And it was so much fun. And it really, really helped me develop my craft and just be around amazing writers like Aspen and have the experience of helping with the book. But I remember one of the things that I'm so grateful for was that you, Aspen, and Sue really, really, really shaped my relationship to editing at that early stage when I was first sharing my work, to be something that was just, you always saw editing and the editing process as something that was a gift. Like, I didn't even question that. And because you always thought that way, it didn't even occur to me to see editing as something to be, super precious about, or feel offended by when someone gave me cuts, or, notes that someone else might take as harsh. I feel like you always had the attitude that any edit someone gives you is coming from a place of generosity. Like, they see the best in your work and want to help you get there. And you don't have to take every edit from every person. You have
Yeah.
to know, you have to know your story and what feels right to you. Just because someone gives it to you doesn't mean like take it without discernment. But I feel like the confidence that you've always displayed in knowing your work, and the like fact that you've always looked at edits as like harvesting gems. Like you take the gems, you leave the rest, and you're grateful for it. Like it didn't make you like question your work and your worth. It was just like, okay, cool. I know what story I'm telling. This edit really helps me. They're right. I don't need this extra paragraph that I love, but it doesn't really serve, what I'm trying to do. And I feel like that was a really, really, really fundamental gift to my writing process that I've noticed, especially meeting more writers as the years have come by. I don't think everyone has that, and it causes a lot of pain. Like I feel like other attitudes towards editing can just cause like years of like struggle in friends of mine who are writers who just like it hurts them to get edits that they perceive as like cutting. And to me, I think I'm just really grateful that that was something that totally just changed my relationship to writing and editing in general, that I wish for every writer, because it saves so much heartache.
Well,
Great. Thank you,
that's-
Karina.
Yeah, and like the way that
Yeah.
Karina edits is like so clearly from a place of love and generosity and curiosity and like digging, like mining for gold. And I felt so like seen in a way I never had, and like so uplifted and like nourished and nurtured through her notes and her questions, because they cut right to the truth that I might never have ever found. Like I changed through the process of working with her. I think I actually grew up a lot through it.
We
So
both did, for sure.
what I'm getting from this, so that as the takeaway for all of us is that it's a very special relationship that you have with the people that look at your work in its early stages, and not everybody is nurturing and wonderful. I know some people
Yeah,
that
not everybody always deserves it too. It's true.
right. So we do have to be discerning with who we let in. And yet when you find people that you trust and that can get you and that spiritually are like there to support you, and there's no malice, and it's not too harsh. It's not too, it's like being surgical, as Joey Sutton and I like to talk about, like like with a fine knife, not like a jagged knife that hurts. Like nurture that relationship, because it's gold. It's gold as you move forward.
So
Go
I would
ahead,
also
Aspen.
add to that, like, I think that's absolutely right. Like you want someone who is intentional and tactful. That's ideal. But what's most important, because I know like Sue is definitely, she can be blunt.
Yeah.
But like what's most important is that someone is not just a yes man. But
Mhm.
someone's going to tell you their truth. I don't want to say the truth, but their truth.
Right.
And there's always something to learn from an intelligent reader's truth. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean, maybe you decide, okay, well, the way that they would want to change this isn't authentic for me, or that's not my voice, and that's your ultimately your call. But like
Right.
often when I get notes, like I'm not a perfect receiver of notes either. Like often when I get notes, this girl reaction would be like, they just don't get it, like they're wrong. And then like I'll sleep on it and I'll read it again the next day and I'll be like, yeah, you know what? That paragraph wasn't necessary. That metaphor was confusing. It would be helpful to know XYZ before QRT or whatever. Like, you know what? I'm not always right. It's not like, I used to think like, oh, well, Sue Shapiro, she's right about everyone. But I'm the exception. Like she just doesn't, like somehow I'm the exception. I was always the exception in my mind at first. And then, I would sleep on it for a night or maybe 3. And then I'd be like, you know what? That whole thread is a different story.
Right.
And you can only tell so many stories in this space,
Right. Oh, that's a great note. Okay, Susan, I see your hand, and we'll take another one after Susan, and then we'll start to wrap up.
So I was wondering if you recommend like about the time of when to get editing done. Like so for example, when you're writing about trauma, like would you recommend that there's a process, or if you're writing something that just needs to come out first, like would you recommend that, like how much time, or how do you know when it's time to actually show your work and start thinking about it like an editor, like looking at your audience? Like, because sometimes I feel like the story just has to come out in the form it wants to come out in first, right? But then how do you gauge that? Like I wouldn't want, people to get someone edit and then their flow gets stopped, Like, so how,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a
how do you do
great
that?
question.
Excellent question, Susan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think the answer to that is very personal. I had a whole draft of Girl in the Woods. It wasn't a good draft, but it was a whole draft before I showed it to anybody. Even Karina, like I had a whole very incomplete draft, but the whole story out. And like, I think if I had started getting notes before I had a whole draft, I would have been totally overwhelmed and paralyzed. They needed to at least, like for me personally, and the same was true for both of my more recent books, like so Your Blue's Not My Blue and the novel. I had a whole draft. It wasn't a good draft, but it was a whole draft that I created in this state of like inspiration and flow, and or not always inspiration, but of showing up every day and creating every day or almost every day until I had a draft. And then once I had a draft, what I do at this point is when I have a draft, I send it to 3 to 5 people who are very different. So for example, this is just a true example for the novel that I'm working on. I had a whole first draft in, I think, April, and I sent it to Kelly. I sent it to Karina, though I think she's read the beginning because I've since worked on it, but Kelly read the whole thing. And I sent it to Michelle Walden, who is a wonderful professional editor as well. And that was it. And I sent, and Daniel, of course. But he was actually very influential in the creation process, not so much in giving notes, but helping me find like, oh, what is the arc of the next chapter you'll write? What is the arc of the next chapter you'll write? But not notes on how to revise, not going backward, not revising anything. Just how to move the ball forward, how to keep producing pages. Kind of like what I did with you, Kelly, as we worked on your book. It's really about like, okay, what's the next scene you want to write? It's not about picking apart how, because you don't yet know until you write a whole draft anyway, what the themes are, what the threads are that will emerge, so to try to edit it, it's like almost like you could be polishing a stone that isn't a diamond. It's like, might as well mine for diamonds, get the diamond, and then cut the diamond and polish the diamond. You don't want to be polishing like this is a bad metaphor, but like just a regular old rock.
No, I think that's absolutely excellent. And because most of us are in first draft mode with whatever it is we're working on. And I think and yet we come together and we're sharing pages with small groups every week. So I think we need to know when we're ready to share something. We don't have to share if we're not ready.
Personally, I would, if I were in this class, I wouldn't share. Like that's
until you're ready. And some people,
I had a whole draft of the book, and then I would send it to like a few people who I really trust.
Right. So part of the inception of this was based on my relationship with Aspen, where we called it miracle miércoles, which is Wednesday. Every Wednesday.
Year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah, I would send Aspen the pages that I'd written, basically a page a day for a week. And then I would give notes. Yeah. So it kept me going, and it was all future. It was all like, okay, it was inspirational. And you would ask key questions like, say more about this, or what did you mean by that? Or maybe elaborate more about that, or that was confusing, but they weren't micro notes, definitely not micro notes at all. So enough to just keep the inspiration flowing.
A lot of it was just figuring out what the next scene you would write was. Like, oh my God, that's so interesting. Write that story.
And there was so much that you gave me in between in those rich conversations. So Aspen, I thank you for being kind of the fairy godmother of this Get Her Done, the author's journey workshop. And there's so many miracles that are happening in all of these amazing authors. Such different stories are being told and pages that are getting written. We're at our first month and people have pages under their belt. It's so exciting. So I want you all to just receive the kind of the fairy dust that comes from having Aspen in our midst. We're so lucky to have this amazing ally on the journey with us, and I feel so blessed to have you, Aspen, and Karina, and all of you to get to be in this journey with you. It's raising the bar for me. I'm writing more pages. I'm producing more. There's an energy to this group, and it wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, Aspen. So I just want to thank you, everybody. Unmute yourself if you would, and let's just give Aspen some like wild, I don't know, clap.
Thank
Yay!
you, Aspen.
Thank you so much. And please, everybody, check out her books, Girl in the Woods and Your Blue is Not My Blue. And check out her social media tomorrow to read her first published poem. So exciting. Aspen, thank you so much for joining us. I really can't thank you enough. You know how much I love you. I could write books and novels all about that. Sometimes you meet people in your life and your life just changes. And you've been one of those people for me. So
thank you so much for having me at this wonderful class. And Karina, it was great to see you. And
can't wait to read all the next great work.
So good to
like with Karina and Kelly, you're in good hands.
Thank you, honey. All right, I'm going to stop that recording as we say bye to Aspen. You all, everybody stay for a moment.